Hello, everyone, and welcome again on our channels and on XRMOS. We streamed on LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. You can ask your question on YouTube if you want, so please join the YouTube link if you have our message on social media. Today is our first talk of 23, and that first talk is about 360 video production. That's an area that is often seen in festivals and of course online. But there is a struggle with a big interactive installation, and I'm glad to welcome today one of the most brilliant producers from France, TARGO. Hello, everyone.
Hello, Mathieu.
Hello, Mathieu. Hi, everyone.
Bonne année, as we say in French.
Yes.
We met in December, in fact, because you just released a project on Meta on the Meta store. But we came across a few times the last few years because you produce, almost 1 or 2 projects per year, I guess. And I was often impressed by the way that you find ways to produce 360 movies that are just not like putting a camera on the ground, but you manage to do a little bit more, and that's what we're going to address today. Maybe to begin, can you tell us a few words about how the TARGO journey begins?
Yes. So first of all, thank you, Mathieu, for giving us the opportunity today to talk here and just to deep dive into the work we're doing at TARGO. Very briefly, so I'm Victor. I'm the producer of the documentaries we do at TARGO, and I co-founded the company with Chloe.
Yeah, and I'm Chloe, and I'm the one directing, creating the experiences at TARGO.
So very briefly, I think the story of TARGO begins 5 years ago now. Really, when we started, the first time we had our hands on a VR camera was 5 years ago. We were still students at the time. So really, the early story of TARGO is a sort of like a student project that we just fell in love with VR. And I fell in love with the technology. And one day I was talking with Chloe, and we were just trying to think of what we could do with this technology, with the 360 videos. And along the conversation we were having at the time, we started to think, okay, we have 360 cameras. Chloe loved telling stories. Her background is in journalism. And we just started to think about what if we could bring people on the field with us, and what if we could actually tell stories using 360. So that's the starting point of the company. And then we started to work on more and more, let's say, high profile and premium kind of content in VR, and I think that's really the starting point. Then where we are today is about making VR as mainstream as possible with documentaries that will speak to everyone, and we'll dive into the kind of stories we pick. But the goal is really to use this technology to allow everyone to live stories that they couldn't live otherwise.
Mm-hmm. How do you see your journey through you started TARGO a few years ago, but 360 video evolved a lot since then. How do you see things? How do you see directing a project and producing a project from your first one maybe to today?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say that like the first project of TARGO were, also very early in the way that we managed to create like 360 content. So like our first content were also really depending on the technology we had then. So like the first 360 camera were, very low quality. I remember like filming with the Pix Pro, Kodak Pix Pro at first. So, very kind of low quality camera. So it was also hard to just imagine something like very premium, because like the technology, the material the hardware wasn't available yet. So we really saw like the evolution of the technology, and that evolution really allowed us to imagine new content and just have the freedom to create this very a great variety of content. And this wouldn't have been possible like a few years ago. So we've seen the evolution of the technology, and of course like the 360 content. I think like one of the first things we wanted to avoid, and which is still like one of our really one of the things we really want to focus on, is avoiding the gadgets kind of things that 360 and VR could bring. Because like at the beginning, the first time you put a VR headset on, you're just amazed by the technology, by the immersion that it allows. And I think there is like a great danger of just taking this technology, this 360 content, and saying, okay, this is it. It's enough. Like 360, it brings something so new that we don't have to think about the storytelling, about the story we want to tell. And this is really something we want to avoid. That way, we always focus on the stories we wanted to tell. And that was the first thing we really focus on, like finding great stories to tell in VR, and think about 360 content, VR content, as really what it is for itself, like as a new medium, and not using like 360 to tell stories that would have been also great like on 2D screen. So that was our first thing, and I think it's something that keeps going. And of course, like the topics evolved a lot, but we always had like this focus on non-fiction stories and bringing like a strong character, strong environments, highly visual environments in VR. That's something we still continue on, but I think that we didn't allow ourselves to think about topics that we do today, such as food, because we didn't have the technology. So a lot of our ideas today are due to technical evolutions, and I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
I think one thing that we've also seen as the evolution when we started is 360 was also something that you could watch on other devices, right? It was something you could watch on the mobile, it was something you could watch on your desktop. So there was like lots of ways to access this kind of 360 content. And at the beginning, really, when we started, there was a question of, is the 360 content going to be part of our sort of like the type of media we consume on mobile and on desktop or not? And at the beginning, we thought it could be. So we started also working a lot for what we call the flat surfaces, which is like all the 2D screens, the laptop, the desktop, the mobiles. And at some point, we realized that where we got most of our views was in the VR headsets. And at some point, we started to stop focusing on everything that was a 360 meant for flat surfaces, but we started to focus really onto the people who have a VR headset. And one day, we really had this conversation of saying, okay, now I think if you don't have a VR headset, you're not part of our target group. And we're targeting only the people who have VR headsets. So what it's changed is the way we craft the stories, of course, narratively, but also technically. We went from monoscopic, so 360, kind of like classic 360, to stereoscopic, that provides a sense of 3D, so it provides more immersion and more sense of belonging to the story. So we've seen that, the technical capabilities for the creation, so what Chloe mentioned on the cameras, had a huge impact on us, but also the distribution tools available. So the fact that there's more and more VR headsets has radically changed the game into how we craft and who we create content for.
And we have a few words about distribution later, but before we talk about your project and maybe going back in history about the TARGO production, how do you choose a topic, a subject for your films? Because in non-fiction, you have a wide range of, from food to historical setup. How do you choose a topic for a VR film?
I think there's two sides to it. There's a production side, which is what kind of stories, and as TARGO, what kind of stories do we want to tell, and then how do we tell them? For the part of like the kind of stories we want to tell, we have a core belief, and it's really the way we started the company, which is when you looked at VR 5 years ago and still a bit today, it was very divided into two kind of extremes. On one side, you had games and arcade games that were like mostly targeting let's say the hardcore gamers, so that consider VR as a console. So you have this extreme, and on the other side, you have experiences that, in our sense, are very artistic, that are very elaborate, very sophisticated, but sometimes don't have the will or the desire to reach mainstream audiences. And what we stand for, and all the topics we pick, have like an ambition to speak to everyone. So that means that we're going to try to pick stories that, regardless whether you're a gamer, whether you're an artist, whether you're young, old, family, like whoever you are, you're going to be able to relate to that topic. So that's the topic that we hear about on the news. And if you look at the slate of content we've produced, it's always content that you could have watched on another device in terms of like the type of stories that it is. But then in the way we craft the stories, I think that's where we apply a second spin into, like our sort of like a secret sauce.
Yeah, I think it starts a lot with, a conversation, like random conversation with Victor, and we're just like thinking about, different topics we want to talk about, let's say food, let's say historical events. And then we think, okay, this would be like a really good, story for VR, because you have like all this archive material, and also there is a new way to tell it in VR. And then we start to dig on the topic and, find characters, find stories, but it always begin with like, okay, what would you like to see, like for yourself inside the VR headset? Because always, like it could be pretty frustrating. Like when you put a VR headset on, you go to Oculus TV, I mean MetaQuest TV, and it looks like the range of topics that are covered with VR are kind of narrowed. Like for the past few years, it was pretty focused on travel, sports. I mean, like experiencing things, but not really on the big stories that have shaped the century, like the past century, or who are actually meaningful now for today's society. So I think there is also like a challenge for VR to just tell the stories, today's stories, and like really kind of bring something to the discussions in terms of politics, history, tragical events such as 9/11 or even rebuilding Notre Dame. So it also has to deal about contemporary topics and what make the news today.
And maybe that's a good opportunity to talk about your previous project. You wanted to talk about first Notre Dame project, which was released in
2020.
2020.
That was a good landmark for the company, for us, because I think that's the first time that we really touched a topic that was like very universal. The reason we came to talk about Notre Dame and to do a documentary on Notre Dame is it's actually the first one that exactly embodies what we just talked about, which is we have to find topics that are going to speak to everyone. At the time, we were still a pretty small company. We were based in Paris, and we thought, okay, what is there in Paris that can speak to everyone? And so we realized that Notre Dame was probably a topic that would speak to everyone. It's the most visited monument in the world at the time. So it was something like that was obvious that there would be something interesting to say about Notre Dame. And so we produced the first documentary that was called The Man Behind Notre Dame, which was about opening the backstage of the cathedral. And when we were done producing the first documentary, the cathedral caught fire, and then we realized that there was another story to tell, and that the narrative around Notre Dame had completely changed. And so the relevance was even bigger. But there's lots of things I think we discovered on that documentary, because it was the first one that was really a proper 20-minute experience. So narratively, in terms of storytelling, there was a lot of discoveries there for us, but it was really the first one that really embodies, okay, how do we make a mainstream experience? How do we create something that's going to speak to everyone? And the way we crafted the content is exactly in that line.
Yes. Yeah, and it was also the first time like we really had this idea and we actually did it to just like have this idea of traveling through times and like blending past and present. It was the first time we did it, and it's something we keep on focusing and working on our projects, especially like the projects we released like in the past 3 years. So it was the first time we really had something very interesting there, because we filmed in the cathedral before, and we had the opportunity to film after the fire, and we had this amazing shot where we were standing at the exact same position, and inside the VR set you would be able to like experience both temporalities. So that it really was the first time we had these images, experienced this feeling of being both in the present, in the past, and it was something very meaningful and intense. It was an intense experience for us, and it's something that we really wanted to replicate afterwards. So these are like the images of the before and after. And I think, I mean, for Notre Dame, it's really helpful, like when you're inside the destroyed cathedral, just to be able to understand what was the cathedral before, what was the mass at the exact same position where you're standing. Bringing life into something that is completely dead is always very powerful, especially for Notre Dame, because it's a very spiritual location. So it worked really well, and I think it really like the people were also very impressed, and I think it was the first time like something was like that was done in VR. So.
And one of the, I think there's also several elements here into why this piece was important, is in terms of how we tried to make it mainstream. Is just there's 4 people that are interviewed, for instance. You have to. We love to have like narrators who are also interviewed on screen all the time in our experiences. We love the fact that you connect with them one-on-one. And in this documentary, we have 4 people that are interviewed, and all of them represent a different community. right? So we have the mayor of Paris, who represents in some ways like Paris for the tourists and for the Parisians. We have the general who was in charge of rebuilding the cathedral. We have the priest who's in charge of, running the spiritual office of the cathedral. And we then had a historian who was someone who was giving, the kind of like the scope and the understanding of like the importance of the events that just happened at Notre Dame. So being able to pick a topic that is widely recognizable, being able to make it fit into a news cycle, which was, it was the most discussed item in 2019 when there was the fire in the news worldwide, and being able to give a voice to people that will represent everyone. So when you're watching that piece, you feel that it talks to you directly. These are all the elements that we discovered into rebuilding Notre Dame, and that we try to really embed into all the productions we are doing. So we can talk later about the food production, the documentary on the survivor of the 9/11 attacks, but every time building up that connection through characters and making them relate to the relevance of like today is always what we look for. So Notre Dame is really the starting point, I think, of what the TARGO is in terms of content. And since then, we've tried to always replicate and recreate that kind of like very mainstream approach to TARGO.
Yeah, and what I like about your project is it's not just a documentary. That I know VR is reshaping the non-fiction genre, meaning that we can address more things. And maybe next week we will speak with other people about SXSW and real-time software project. But at TARGO, you managed to get a storytelling around every story you get, and that we can speak about surviving 9/11. It's not just shooting in New York. It's about recreating New York, finding testimonies and etc. So you managed to do something a bit more challenging that rather than that just going there and shoot. You did a bit more of that. Can you explain what you did with that project?
Well, so surviving 9/11, just to briefly like summarize the story. So it's the story of General Guzman Macmillan. She was a survivor. She was in the North Tower during the attacks, and when she was in the tower collapsed, and she then stayed like for 27 hours under the rubble, and she managed to survive. She was like the last survivor pilot from the rubble. So her story is, incredible. It's such a powerful story, and it's really what we wanted to focus on. It's really like how can we tell her story, like this amazing story in VR, while remaining like respectful to the family, and make sure that this topic and this experience will be really telling a new way 9/11, but not in a disturbing way, right? So it was really our main focus there. And of course, this idea of being able to go back in time again and being able to see the Twin Towers, watch being really on the center of the World Trade Center Plaza was something we really wanted to work on, because we've never seen the tower. We were too young, and it's something that's really allows you to understand what was the symbol of the towers back then, and which is also a way to illustrate Jenna's story as a young immigrant coming to New York. So this part of recreating New York was really core of the project, and we had the opportunity to find incredible archive footage to do that. So it was definitely like one of the things we wanted to focus on. And of course, telling the story, recreating the environment in 3D. So yeah, showing 9/11 is definitely like a good example in terms of a topic that speaks to everyone, that has been told many times in many different ways in 2D, and where VR could bring really something new and add something to this story.
Uh-huh.
Maybe just to touch a bit more on the because I think the storyline is always what drives us. Like we wanted to cover the 20th anniversary of the attacks, but we had to bring something that was like really new. So Chloe identified the story of Janelle, which was like really the starting point, and the second big work, and I think what's also very substantial on that piece was the ability to recreate New York as it was before the attacks. So I think what's interesting there is that because VR, like there's what you were saying earlier about like, how VR redefines what we can do in nonfiction, it also brings a lot of constraints, because talking about the past in VR is extremely difficult. There's no 360 media, there's no immersive media by definition. So finding content that is going to be a good fit for the people who have a VR headset is very challenging. So it started with a quest for us of trying to find a way to bring people back to New York before the attacks, just to bring back the vibe, getting to understand, the millennium, like all of this kind of excitement that there was by the end of the 90s. And so what we did is that we identified and we located in the archives of the web, panoramic pictures that were taken by photographers at the time, who shot really, panoramic pictures of New York. And basically what we're doing now, but they were pioneers, and they had like old camera, they were, shooting on film. So proper pioneers of VR. And so we discovered that they had these pictures that were basically these films standing into some of their, in their homes and into their storage rooms. And so we asked them to scan all of them. And so after 6 months of research, we found something like 200 or 150 different panoramic pictures of New York before the attacks that could feature in form or another the Twin Towers. And from there, we really started to think that it was possible to talk about the past in VR. And the starting point was this realization that there is actually some media that exists that was shot in the 90s. So that is original, it's not 3D recreated, it's the actual thing that was there that we could remaster, upscale, rework to create an experience that feels immersive when you're in VR. So there was, we did a huge amount of work in terms of how we could remaster it to make it a good way to illustrate Janelle's story. And I think for us that was also a second moment of realization of, if we put in enough work and if we put in enough research in terms of technique, in terms of locating this media, we can talk about the past with VR in a way that no one's ever had. So that's what was really exciting about this project.
Yeah, and I think that for this specific topic, because those were photos and not 3D model, 3D recreation of the World Trade Center, it really conveys something that is really emotional. And this is what I love with 360 video also. It's because it's film, there is something that 3D cannot bring to that. And surviving 9/11 is one of these topics that, of course, we could have recreated the World Trade Center in 3D and put you in the towers or on the World Trade Center plaza. But because these are real photos that were taken one day in New York when there was the tower they were still on, it really it's very emotional to be there, and because it's photo. So it's really also something we were focusing on, finding photos, really films, materials that were taken that day by people. And it was an incredible experience, very surprising experience, of course, to realize that people back in the 90s, back in the 2000s, were also doing VR. And it makes you think and makes you wonder about the life of VR in general, because they were also mentioning that there were VR tour, VR experiences, and it's something that we completely forget for maybe 10 years, and then it really became famous VR, so as something we would have discovered in the 2010, but it was really something very popular back then. So it also makes you think about the medium we were actually working on, and it was very, very interesting experience just to talk to these people also.
Yeah, and they were all very surprised, because you have to think that really there was a company in France that reaches out to these people who shot pictures 25 years ago, and they're like, but how do you even find these pictures? So it was a very interesting experience to go through. And let's just share some of the examples here that we have, I think, to make it more obvious. So we really started with the negatives that we found on the archives of the web. Obviously, negatives, you have to turn them into positive pictures to get the actual results. So as you can see here, these are 4 fisheye lenses that are shot in 4 different directions. And when we stitch them together, we get a 360 panorama. So this is what we got. So here it was still very grainy. There was lots of scratch and dust bits here and there. So we had to clean and upscale everything. Then we went through a pretty extensive work, which is we worked with studios that specialize in this, which convert images from 2D to 3D. So what you're seeing here is what we call a depth map. It basically assigns to every pixel in the picture a distance from the viewer, which when you look at it in the headsets allows you to feel the sense of 3D. So in the end, we have two images, basically one for the left eye and one for the right eye, with a very slight difference. And that allows you to have a fully immersive 360 picture of the Twin Towers back then, which we overlaid with the before after, which, as we just said, has been a theme since we did the rebuilding Notre Dame. So that's one example. There's another one here on the Brooklyn Bridge. So, you know, all of the media were different. Sometimes it was 4 panoramic pictures, sometimes it was dozens, but always the same process with a lot of reconstruction to be involved every time.
Yeah, and those panoramas really also help us to just like overlay archive videos, archive pictures, and just, you know, being there, it really, you know, helps you contextualize and realize the extent of the event, which is something always very hard to do, like when on a 2D screen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So this is the kind of like the scope of work you have to provide in VR when you want to really go back in time. It's not something that like comes super easily. There's a lot of technical research as well, like editorial research, to be able to kind of like bridge everything. But in the end, I think it does bring something new to the memory of the events, because you connect with, you know, the genial story when she tells you these towers were so big you had to look up, and, you know, you could hurt your neck when you do it. In VR, when you're standing at the, you know, on the Twin Tower Plaza and you have to look at the towers, you do get that exact same sensation. So it's very powerful to connect with the testimony, and that's what we discovered here, is really the fact that, you know, it's a way to understand better testimonies, to connect, and just to remember the events. And so that was a very interesting learning for us in terms of technical and editorial approach to history in general.
Yeah, and a bit of a challenge to sorry, to recreate everything. But I was amazed by that, and yeah, I thought that you were going to continue into historical moment and stuff like that, but you chose. We're going to speak about Behind the Dish, which is your 22 production, which
Yes.
was released last month. Just a few words about When We Stay Home, your project you shot during confinement, because it was another challenge technically and logistically, I would say.
I mean, all of them come with their own challenges. Every time the starting point is always topics that we think, you know, should be done. For instance, like the 20th anniversary of 9/11, we thought something had to be done in VR. It felt like, right, there should be something in VR about this. When the lockdown happened, we had the exact same feeling. We went all like into lockdown, and we're like, but there's something that has to be done in VR to show, you know, what's happening in those cities, and to show how empty they are. And so that was, I think, the initial starting point.
Yeah, and also like, because we have this idea of, you know, capturing moments of history in VR, and we like for Notre Dame, or like for Surviving 9/11, it was more like you know, conveying the past, finding, you know, other archive pictures, like VR archive pictures, or archive pictures that could allow us to illustrate that. Here was more like, okay, this is our turn to just like capture history. So if we, you know, don't do it as a VR studio operating in 2020, like, who's going to do it? So it was also some kind of you know, feeling of duty to do that, and to just capture this completely empty city, which is, you know, something that will happen just once in a life, hopefully. But yeah, so it was really something we felt that we should do, really. And the challenge, of course, was to have like a diversity of city while being locked down in Paris. So to do that, we managed to find like teams all over the world. So in Tokyo, in Jerusalem, in Venice, and we did the one in Paris because we were in Paris at the time. And we, you know, talked with this team, make sure that they had like the TARGO kind of approaches to their 3D shoot, to their 360 shoot, sorry. And make sure that, yeah, they would film like the you know, the images we would have shot if we were there. And it was quite a challenge, of course, to organize this while being locked down. But it was actually like a pretty quick production, I would say, like compared to our other productions. This one was, pretty quick to do in a way. Also, like very like the episodes are just 5 minutes episode, so it's also like shorter than what we used to do. But it was a really fun experience at the end. Like,
yeah, I think also, and that ties in all together with like even the name TARGO at the beginning. The name TARGO comes from like the basically the name of a scientist, a doctor who documented people who can remember everything in their life. It's called hypermnesia. It's when you recall really everything you've done, you've seen in your life. And we love that idea with VR. And when we stayed home was exactly this. It was like, okay, there's this moment in history we need to like capture forever, and we're very happy to have done it. And we've seen that there was outlets, for instance, the New York Times did a fantastic article which was called "The Great Empty," which was basically the same thing but in a photographic series. So picked cities totally empty, and we hope that in some way it helps remembering these times. And when we look at it now, when we released them, it was like our daily life, right? These cities were empty. When we got out, it was empty. But now that we look at it, we're like, it was completely crazy. Like to look at it. So it's one of these topics that really is going to gain more and more value for the viewers across time, because we're going to be realizing that, it's probably the only way and the only chance now you have to visit Paris, Tokyo, Jerusalem, Venice, totally empty.
Yeah. And maybe in 20 years, like people which, are going to reach out to us to have like this footage. So yeah.
I do hope so. And then from that outside world, capturing the outside world, you decided to go for another challenge, which was shooting in 360 for macro events. Can you tell us a few words about Behind the Dish, which is a 3-part project just released on the Meta TV, and your latest production for now?
I think the same starting point is food is a topic we've always wanted to do. It's one of these topics, that when you think about mainstream, food is like the most universal topic. So it's something we really wanted to do from the beginning, but we always thought that there was something that would have been missing if we had done only 360. So for a long time we had been pushing back, like, okay, food, we don't have the right technique. We feel like we can bring something with 360 to it, but we'll just show basically the settings. So we'll show the kitchens, we'll show the landscape, the nature, but showing food in VR, there was no way to do this properly. You would be looking at a plate like this, like with the VR headset, but it would have been disappointing. So one day, the starting point is one day we just realized that we could change the scale that, of the viewers in the VR headsets, that we could, kind of like transfigure the size of food. And so instead of looking at a small plate here, we could create a technique that will change the scale of the viewer, so you could feel like you're meeting food. You can feel like you're looking at sort of like a gigantic sculpture, and that was the starting point. I think then the story also fell together, but the starting point was, okay, now we have all the things we need to be able to tell a story on food.
Yes, and the next step was obviously like finding the stories we would want to tell, like with this technique and on this topic. And food, like it's really like a male-dominated industry. There are very few women doing food, which is ironic when you think about the fact that they're doing like the kitchen a lot in their homes, but not like professionally. So we thought it would be like a good way, to show like stories which are just not the stories you would have find like on another platform or even in 2D documentaries. So we picked 3 different female chefs all over the world, and the idea was really to show like 3 different kind of foods. So we have like a female sushi chef in Japan, we have a star chef in France, Hélène Darroze, and a soul food chef in the US, Deborah Ventres. So these are, profiles that are, they have unique life trajectories. Deborah Ventres, she was a flight attendant before doing a food career. Yumi Shiba, she fought cancer. She's one of the rare female sushi chefs because it's something which is kind of forbidden in Japan for the women. So all of them are really have like this will of becoming a great food chef, and the stories were just the starting point of what we wanted to tell. And then, of course, like their different kind of foods also allows us to kind of showcase the technology we had in really like 3 different ways, and I think like all of them, like all of their foods really shows something different with the macro. And of course, like being able to go to France, Japan, the US, it's also a way to travel in those countries, discover the culinary tradition, and have this idea of highly visual environment, which is also something very important in VR.
Mhm. And then comes the technical challenge: how to shoot, cook, chef and cooking at the same time, and the dishes.
Mm-mm.
How can you explain that? We spoke about that last year when I wrote about it, but can you explain that for the audience?
Mm-hmm. First, when you want to create like an effect like this, there's no direct way to do it. So of course, when we said basically the idea was like change the scale of the viewer or change the scale of the plate, depending on your perspective and how you see it, there was no direct way to do it. So we did a lot of R&D at the beginning to try to look at the best ways to approach and to bring this effect to life. So we reached out to a lot of studios trying to understand all the different techniques. Should we do 3D? Should we scan the food? There was plenty of methods. But the one thing that we stuck to, which is what Chloe talked about earlier, which is the fact that we want it to be actual film. We want it to be the actual footage. We want it to be the food because we want to see the grain, we want to see the smoke, the effect, the salt. Like we want to see what you see in the real world. And to get to that end, we had to create like a specific rig, like a dedicated camera, basically. So we worked with a studio in Germany that like manufactures literally pieces for the camera that we assembled, and that allowed us to basically go into the kitchen of the chefs, put our rig, and film their food in a radically new way. If you want to get a bit more technical, and it's a bit technical, so I try to break it down like simply. The way to change the scale for the viewers when you're filming food, the technique to change the scale of the viewer in VR is basically relying on one simple principle. Today, our sense of scale as humans is defined by basically the distance in between our eyes, right? So we see the world in 3D with the scale and the sense of scale that we have because our eyes are basically 64 millimeters difference. If we reduce the size between our eyes, everything would look much bigger. Think of it when you were a kid, everything looked bigger. It's partly because the distance in between our eyes were smaller. And so basically what we had to do was to recreate that effect within the headset. So how we're doing it very simply is that we are bringing two camera lenses very, very, very close, 1 centimeter apart, so 6 to 10 times closer than the traditional eye, and that's what gives you the sensation that you're really being shrunk to the size of an ingredient on plate. So it's a technical optical work basically that's really being done, but that's how you can tell the story, because the idea of like changing perspective on food, because we're showcasing the female chefs around the world, had to go through also the idea of like changing perspective on food, like literally. So creating that rig was I would say a very interesting step for us in terms of the process of creating this kind of project. I'll share with you right now some visuals of the rig, just for you to understand really when we're saying that we created a camera. This is a footage from the testing. So as you can see here, like it's not the actual food we shot, it's really for the 3D expert for the testing. Let me just remove the sound here. So this is basically the rig. It's a very complex camera that we had to bring into extremely tight environment, right? This is inside of the kitchen because we need the food to be like very like right outside of the kitchen. We need the chefs to plate it. So we had our rig. This is basically the core idea. If you can see, there's two lenses of the camera that are overlapping. That's what creates the sense of scale in 3D. I apologize if it's a bit technical, but it's the actual process, and that's the kind of footage that we get in the end.
Yeah, because the real thing is to shoot in the kitchen with the smoke and the chef setting up the plate and etc. etc. It's not about recreating things. It's about catching the reality of things.
Like we had to be in the kitchen because it's where everything happens, and they have the tools, they have the team, so we couldn't like go in a studio and say, okay, cook something for us. So it was really the challenge, like being in their kitchen, and also like making sure that they have they had enough space to just like, you know, dress, assemble the plate and just cut things. And as you can see, like they would go like on the side of the set. And for them, it was also challenging because usually they don't cook like on the side of something; they just cook like in front of them. So for them, it was also, you know, quite hard to understand. It was a lot of, just explain to them like how we wanted to do the whole things. But at the end, it really works well. We also had like enormous challenge of, you know, lighting the full well, because this kind of camera are demanding a lot of light. So it was making the sets even busier in the small kitchens. But yeah, we managed to do it, and I think the chef, they watched it like in the VR headset, and they were themselves amazed by their food, like, because, you know, it was a way that they never seen that, you know, their own dishes in that way before. So even for us as human, it's an experience which is pretty amazing, because you would never see like a giant plate in front of you like that, with like all the details, all the textures, the reflections. So it's a very intense, very, very unique experience.
And it's now online. If everyone has a Meta Quest, Meta headsets, you can watch it on Meta TV. That's another thing is
for free.
For free.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and every one of your projects is on Meta TV, right?
Most of them, yes.
Yeah, right. That's what another thing is about distribution. So you work with Meta on your latest project. It also allows you to like broadcast everything quite quickly, and to, as you said, going mainstream, going for the main audience in VR. And you are also going to festivals and selected for awards and etc. Emmy awards. You will be at South by in March with 2 projects.
Yes.
But we had that discussion many times. You were very dedicated to online store, going fully for a mainstream distribution there.
It's for us, there's no other way to feel like this is what should be done. We have like almost physical reaction to things that are not being shown like and broadcasted to the public. Like we're at such an early stage of this industry that if we start doing projects that are like super exclusive, that will get seen by like 1,000 people, like, I mean, for us, this is not where we want to stand. So we have this vision of like, okay, whatever we do, we want to make it like available to as many people as possible. And for us, there's no other way than going online, because if when I meet someone and I tell that person, oh, you have to go to like, let's say, I don't know, like to Dallas to see the experience, like good, but also not super accessible. So we want to have this kind of like always this leg, which is the online distribution, which is what allows us to reach basically everyone who has VR headset. And I think it's just something that that's in our DNA. And so it ties everything together. You know, we do mainstream topics because we want them to appeal to everyone. So we also want them to be distributed as widely as possible. It all ties in together into the kind of like the company and kind of production company we want to be. But for us, yes, like the online distribution is such an important element. There's lots of things to unlock here. You know, we think that the most views we're going to get are in the future, right? What we've done in the past has always been like gotten a lot of views and a lot of attention. But what we think is that, you know, this industry is really in infancy, and so it means that the main audience lies ahead, and so we have to think of the new ways to reach them. And for us, like the online distribution is such a critical part.
Mm-hmm. And this is where 360 film is still important. It's because most of the content we see online is 360 film. We have one question from Fabio, which he's asking, what's your thought on 360 versus 180 stereo?
I do have like a pretty strong opinion on this, but like we've discussed this many times, because of course, like it's way easier, I would say. I mean, not easier, but like a little bit more easier to produce like 180 content, less production, like just one camera, no stitch. So yeah, we could do like lots more productions, like if we were doing 180. but I feel like, I mean, it's really something personal, but when I'm in the VR headset and I turn my head and this is just like completely black, I get this frustration of not being in a, I feel like I'm being spoiled in a way of the environment. And I think there is something very important, especially for nonfiction, to be able to, like, being in the 360 environment and being able to imagine that it's a real place, it's something that exists, and we're not hiding anything from you, especially talking about nonfiction journalism experiences. It's really, really important. And I feel that when I'm in a 180 experience, it's really great for, like, I think, music performance, artistic things, when you really have to focus on what's in front of you. But when it comes for, like, nonfiction experience, being in an environment, it's just, yeah, I really prefer, like, being in a 360.
Yeah, there's natural frustration with 180. And that being said, like in when you look at the food, it's even less than 180, right? The food is like focused in front of you, but at that moment we're asking you to focus specifically on that element. It's a pitch black, it's almost a visual effect. So there's a sense of frustration, and we've tried VR 180. We've tried many times. Every time we're trying to keep an open mind. We're like, okay, let's give it a new look, and like, what do we think about it? And every time we're like, meh, So it's like we haven't found a use case where we were like blown away by the gains of VR 180 versus the VR 360. So we're sticking to it.
Yes, and also still, like, in the editing process, of course, like, we really focus on guiding the viewer and make sure that he's looking at the right thing at the right moment. And there is, like, something 180 in the way we do the editing of the 360 video, because at the end, like, most of the people who are going to watch the experience are just going to watch, like, what's in front of them, and they're not going to turn around. But being aware that there is something behind your back is really important to experience the 360 content.
Or to rewatch the project many times to get the full pictures.
All the Easter eggs.
Yeah.
How do you see the state of 360 film today and what's coming next? Is it? I have the feeling that on your side, as you address many challenges, it's about, like, creating a new rig every time, or not every time, but creating a new rig, finding footage, archive, and etc. Is it easier today to produce a 360 film?
I would say it gets easier if you stay at the same quality level. The problem is when it gets easier, we always optimize for the quality. So because it gets easier, we have like more resources to invest. And so instead of just doing a classic 360, then we'll do classic 360, but we'll build a rig and we create that new sensation. So I would say, yes, it tends to get easier, but it all depends on what you optimize for. If you optimize for, like the wow effect to the viewers, then you have to go beyond this. So I don't see VR 360 going like a much like more mainstream in terms of like ways of fabricating high quality premium VR experiences. 3D workflow haven't been worked out yet completely. There's still like human work that needs to be done a lot. So we see that the production, can get accessible. You can buy a GoPro and do like a film, like a video, I would say. But that's not how you get like a premium, like a lot of research, kind of like high quality film that people are looking for. Because there's more and more experiences like this, I think the expectations of viewers when they log into one of these TV applications on VR headsets, they want to be impressed. They don't want to see the same thing all over again. So we have to be creative on the creation side. Like we have to keep thinking of new ways, and every time we have to think of like a new story, interesting, mainstream, but also like what's the creative spin? Like how do we bring something that you haven't seen before, and how do we get you think like how do they do this? And that's what we did with going to the past with in New York before the attacks. That's what we're doing with the Behind the Dish. It's always trying to bring that element of okay, that's pretty cool, and that's the reaction that we want to get from people. So unfortunately, I would say that for us it doesn't get any easier because we just like keep on pushing all the time.
Yeah. Maybe last word will be about your next news. So you're at South by 23 with two projects. Behind the Dish, we'll have not the premiere, but will be US premiere in festival.
Yes.
And you have another historical project, JFK.
So
am I allowed to ask what it is about?
Yes, I think the name spoils, gives a bit of information.
So yes, JFK, the name is JFK Memento. As you can see, the subtitle is A Chronicle of the Assassination. So here we're going to talk about the assassination of Kennedy. It's going to be like the 60th anniversary of the assassination on November 2023. So, this is our focus of making this project available for this anniversary. And the story is going to be on, kind of reliving the hours that follow the assassination of Kennedy. So from the moment he arrives in Dallas until the shooting of Lee Harvey Oswald, who is suspected to be the shooter, we just like go through the, all the hours of these 2 days, interviewing the witnesses, the detective who work on the investigation. So we managed to interview a lot of different people who actually experienced this history. They are old people, of course, and they are telling us, what they saw at that moment.
And two things that are very, I think this project really like ticks all the boxes of what we've been trying to achieve in the past. It's going to be an interactive project in the sense of like it's based on 3D recreations, based on scans, lots of like actual recreation of the spaces. So it's something new for us in which we're venturing, and so far we are extremely satisfied with what we're getting. It's also a huge work on the archives, right? The goal here is that we want to make you relive 48 hours basically through the archive media. So we are pushing everything we learned through, the 9/11 project, through the rebuilding Notre Dame, behind the dish also, and we're like channeling all of these learnings into this new production. So for us, it's really like a new step. And two things: it's going to be published online, obviously, because what we just said, and it's also created in collaboration with the Sixth Floor Museum, which is a JFK museum, if you wish, in Dallas, which is in charge of sharing the story of Kennedy, like his presidency, but also his death and his legacy. So we're really proud and like honored to be working with them, because there's a reference US institution to talk on that story, and there's going to be an experience also at the museum to be discovered, which is obviously taking bits of the JFK memento. One thing, without spoiling too much about the experience, one thing of how we are, like what we're going to be doing, I just want to present something that we did on Behind the Dish, which is, the way we treat some of the archives. And that's,
Yep.
I think one of the elements that we're going to be including in this upcoming project. So just to shed some light on Behind the Dish, what we did is we take some of the personal pictures, like throughout the careers of the chefs, and the goal was to recreate life-size scenes of their memories. So what we do is we reproject all of the information and everything you see in 3D in front of you, so you'll feel like you're belonging into the scene. And so I should just show you this as a sort of like a preview of what could be done for a project on Kennedy. So here you see these are the pictures, and this is the way we're reprojecting them in space. We're giving them really like the volume. So this is what we're doing with the chef's picture, and if you apply this thinking into how we are dealing with the archive pictures in JFK Memento, it can give you a sort of like an idea of what you're going to be seeing and what you're going to be experiencing throughout this experience. So that's everything we can tell. It's already a lot about JFK Memento. Everything will be announced more when we are at South by and when we'll be premiering the project there in March.
And maybe we will do another session to discuss the project after the release. But we do hope to see you in Austin, and thank you very much for the talk today. It's very helpful to get what is possible with 360 production. So thanks very much, and see you soon.
Mathieu. Thank you to everyone who tuned in today. And I mean, if you want to reach out and follow the conversation, we're always happy to. Comments, reach out by email. We're passionate about what we do, so talking about it is always a pleasure. So thank you really very much, Mathieu.
Thank you so much
for the opportunity.
And you can catch up on XArmors with written articles and follow us on social and blah blah blah, etc. As we say, subscribe to the channel. And see you soon, guys.
Bye bye.
Thank you. See you.